Hello Year 10, this is now the second lesson in the unit B1.3 Digestion and the Digestive System in Humans. In the first lesson we had a look at a balanced diet, thinking about the different nutrients that you need to be healthy. What we're going to be concentrating on in today's lesson now is to have a look at the consequences of an unbalanced diet and to start thinking about the reason we need to digest the food that we're eating. I'd like you to find this information in your books. It's on 2 pages after where we finished off last lesson. So when we're thinking about an unbalanced diet, there can be a number of different consequences that can occur, and it depends in which way the diet is unbalanced. So if people are not getting enough food, then it can lead to them being underweight. In developed countries like the UK, it's quite easy to ensure that the population is able to eat a balanced diet. We've got good availability of food and a good level of distribution of fresh food. Obviously, that's not the case in all countries. If a country maybe has had a civil war, a drought, potentially there could be pests that are eating the crops. That can lead to famine. People suffering from starvation will often display certain symptoms, as you can see on the screen there. So they will be quite thin and suffer from muscle wastage. So the body will start breaking down the muscles to use the nutrients within them. They will have a poor immune system. The body obviously needs to use the little energy that it's getting to keep all the vital organs and everything functioning correctly. So there's less energy available then for the immune system. So they would be more susceptible then to diseases. In women, starvation can lead to an effect on the menstrual cycle. So periods may become irregular or stop altogether. That obviously will affect their fertility. If they're not having a menstrual cycle, then they're not going to be able to have a baby. So again, the body is prioritising the vital organs. It's not going to waste nutrients by losing that blood and tissue in a period. We do see people suffering from the symptoms of starvation in the developed world, but they'd be related to conditions such as anorexia. So with that, we're thinking about sort of a lack of energy in the diet, but you can also have an unbalanced diet if you are lacking in a particular nutrient, for example, a vitamin or a mineral. We discussed last lesson that a lack of iron can lead to anemia. And other deficiency diseases are caused by lack of certain vitamins. So you've got 2 examples there in the book. So where we're thinking about scurvy, that would be a lack of vitamin C. And rickets would be caused by a lack of vitamin D in the diet. With vitamin D, however, it's not just about diet. Vitamin D is made in the body when we have sunlight. So when you're exposed to sunlight, your body is able to produce vitamin D as long as you've had the correct nutrients into your body within your diet. Your diet may also be unbalanced in a way of getting too much energy or too much of a particular nutrient within the diet. If people eat in excess of their body requirements, they may become overweight, and at the extremes of that, they can become obese or extremely obese. If you look in your booklet, you have a picture there which shows you these different sort of categories when we're thinking about somebody's weight. There are lots of diseases that are associated with being overweight. For example, as you can see there, type 2 diabetes, arthritis because of the increased pressure that's being put onto the joints, and heart disease and high blood pressure. Just going to think quickly about high blood pressure in particular. So high blood pressure is related to obesity and taking in too much more energy than you need, which is then stored as fat. But also high blood pressure is particularly as well related to salt intake. So if you're asked the question, about a health problem that would be related to eating too much salt, that would be high blood pressure. You can make a note of that onto your booklet, please. You also need to be aware of the consequences of eating, in particular, too much sugar. So obviously that will contribute to obesity, to diabetes, etc. But also when you think about sugar, too much sugar does lead as well to an increased risk of tooth decay. So you can again make a note of that onto your booklet, please. Just a few facts on the board now about obesity. So obesity levels are a concern, particularly in countries like the UK and America. The world is becoming more obese. We've got some data there. In 1980, 250 million people in the world were either overweight or obese, whereas by 2008 it was up to 904 million people, and those numbers are still rising. So just spend a little bit of time now reading that information that you have there on the screen, please. If you need to pause the video, please do. Okay, so what we're going to do now are some practice questions related to the information we talked about last lesson and so far in this lesson. This information you have at the bottom of the page that you've been looking at. So what I'd like you to do is to work your way through these questions and also then the questions on the next 2 pages. Okay, so these are all past exam questions. So start with this one and then work your way through this information here. Before you do this question, however, I do need to just give you a little bit of information about cholesterol. So in this question, you're going to be having a look at 2 particular diets. Obviously, people who are overweight or obese may want to try and lose that weight to increase their health. So they may decide to try a particular diet. So in this question, you're asked to compare the effectiveness of 2 particular diets. But for you to be able to do that, you just need to understand a little bit about cholesterol. So if we just have a look at the table, on the table you can see it says here, mean change in blood HDL concentration. Now, HDL is what we call the good cholesterol carriers. Whereas LDL are the bad cholesterol carriers. So it would be good to have more HDLs and it would be good to have less LDLs. So if you decide to look at this data in your answer, that should help you. So I'd like you to pause the video now. As I said, work your way through this question and then the questions on the next 2 pages. And then I'll go through the answers when you've answered them. Okay, we're now going to have a look at the answers to these questions. So if we start with this page, a teenager drinks a can of sugary cola every day. After a year, he is likely to be 6 kilograms heavier than a similar teenager who drinks low sugar cola. Give one reason why. So what you need to say here, obviously the one who's drinking the sugary cola is taking in more energy. See, there's not much space for this answer. So he's taking in more energy. If this is not used, it would be stored as fat. I'm just going to say if not used, it would be stored as fat. Name one disease linked to obesity. So you've got a few options for this one. So you can give yourself the mark if you've written either arthritis, diabetes, or heart disease. The graph shows the maximum recommended daily salt intake for children of different ages. What is the maximum recommended daily salt intake for a 6-month-old child? So from the graph, you should have worked out that that would be 0.5 grams. Question C, a 6-year-old child has burger, beans and crisps for lunch. The table shows the mass of salt in each of the foods. Now, obviously, you've got the table in your books. You can't see it there on the screen. So if you add up the mass of salt in each of those foods, you'll find that they've eaten 3.1 grams of salt. How much more salt has a 6-year-old child eaten than the maximum recommended daily mass? They've eaten 0.1 grams more, because if you look at the graph, you can see that for a 6-year-old child, the recommended daily intake is 3 grams. So that's just one meal though. So the 6-year-old child has eaten more salt in one meal than they should be having throughout the whole of the day. Question 1E, name one health problem linked to too much salt in the diet. As I mentioned earlier, we'd be looking at high blood pressure. Okay, if we go on to question 2, so this is the one where you were asked to compare the claims of 2 different diets. So one group were given a low carbohydrate diet, one group were given a low fat diet. So we were trying to see whether the claims about the low carbohydrate diet were correct. Does it give quicker weight loss and a more healthy body than the low fat diet? So they've used 120 volunteers in 2 equal groups. One group was given a low carb diet, one group was given a low fat and cholesterol diet. Both were given the same exercise to do, a weekly information meeting, and were allowed the same number of calories per day. So we're looking at the results in the table after 24 weeks, and you were then asked to answer these questions. So what was the independent variable in this investigation? So what you should have there, the independent variable was the diet. So it was either low carbohydrate or low fat. Give one variable that the scientists tried to control in this investigation. So you've got a couple of options here. The best ones you could give would be the number of calories. The other things that they would have controlled were the exercise, the group meetings, and the number of volunteers. Their method wasn't perfect though, so there were a couple of ways in which they could have had unreliable data. So for this one, you could say that they didn't observe the exercise. So they don't know if the volunteers actually carried out the exercise program or the amount of food. So they told the volunteers what to eat, but obviously they didn't observe them. The volunteers may have cheated. They didn't control the mass of the subjects. Okay, so the volunteers' mass at the start was not something they controlled. Obviously that would have an effect on the amount of mass that they could potentially lose. They also didn't control the age of the subjects, gender, occupation. So, for example, you could have had two volunteers, they were doing the same exercise program, but if one of them had a manual job and one of them had an office job, obviously that's going to affect the amount of calories that they would be using during the day. Also, if you look at the table, there were different proportions of people who completed the course. The last question then, does the data support the claim in the book? The answer there would be yes. And they will accept any of these reasons. So the low carbohydrate diet lost more mass. The low carbohydrate diet lost more body fat. Or you could say that the low carbohydrate diet resulted in more HDL, which, as I said earlier, is the good cholesterol carriers. So you've got a better balance between the HDLs and the LDLs. Okay, if we move on to the last page that I asked you to complete, this table gives you information about the nutrients in different hot drinks. So this was about analysing the data to see which of the food groups these different drinks were containing. So question 1, use the information in the table. Which drink gives the least energy? Would be the brewed coffee. What is the main difference between a cafe latte made with skimmed milk and a cafe latte made with whole milk? It is the fat content. So in the whole milk, there's 10.6 grams. And in the other, there is 0 grams. You could also have mentioned about the energy. So another option would be the energy content, where with the whole milk it was 838 kilojoules, and with the skimmed milk it goes down to 511 kilojoules. Which is the most unhealthy drink? Would be the white chocolate mocha with whole milk. Two reasons for your answer. It's got high levels of fat and saturated fat. So you could say either of those. It's got high levels of sodium. And it's also got high levels of sugar. Okay, so just to finish off the lesson, we're just going to start thinking about why we need to digest the food that we eat. So not all the food that you eat is soluble. As you should know from year 7, something that is soluble is able to dissolve. And also the particles of the food will not be small enough to diffuse through the little holes that you have in your small intestine to get into your bloodstream. So as you can see in the picture at the bottom of the screen here, this would be a blood vessel. This would be the wall of the intestine. which you've got there. And these would be molecules of food such as starch, fat, carbohydrate. They are large insoluble molecules. Starch, protein and fat would be large insoluble molecules. They need to be broken down into smaller molecules so that they can fit through the wall of the small intestine into the blood vessel. Once they're in the bloodstream, then those molecules can be taken to wherever they need to go within the body. That process of breaking down these large insoluble food molecules into smaller soluble molecules is carried out by enzymes. We learned about enzymes in the first unit, so if you remember, they are biological catalysts. They speed up reactions in living organisms. When it comes to digestion, the enzymes are working outside of cells. So they would be made within cells in certain places in your body, which we'll have a look at as we go through this unit. They would then be released into your digestive system. So the digestive enzymes are produced by specialized cells in different areas within the body and in the lining of your gut, and those would then be released into the gut. So they pass out of the cells into your digestive system, where they can then come into contact with the food molecules. So this digestion that is occurring, taking those big insoluble molecules that can't get through into your bloodstream, breaking them down into smaller molecules that can, is carried out by enzymes. So the enzymes catalyze the breakdown of those large molecules into smaller molecules. Next lesson, we're going to have a look at some of these different enzymes that are able to take these molecules and break them down. So just to finish off today's lesson, what I would like you to do, if you turn back a few pages in your booklet, you've got a page that is mostly blank. At the top, it says what we've got on the screen here. So design your own mind map on what a healthy balanced diet comprises of, why each component is required, and the implications of not having enough and too much of each food group. Usually I would set this as a homework from this lesson. So if you can make sure you get this done before your next timetabled biology lesson, please. So there's an example there on the screen of what this might look like. So nutrition in the middle, the different food groups around the outside. Obviously this one hasn't got water. You can add water on to yours if you wish. And then it's giving the functions of each group. It's giving where it's found, so which particular foods would contain a lot of it. And also then the implications of not having enough or having too much of each food group as well. So if you can just make sure you get that mind map completed in preparation for your next lesson. Thank you.